So we wanted to run a slightly different panel of actual current discussion. And I'm delighted that the first person to launch into it is Ariel, who we brought back from Harvard to the Hasso-Plattner Institute, and she's the capacity in this country to talk about health economics in digital health.
Thank you, Aldo. So I wanted to kick us off by saying something a bit intriguing or a bit controversial, which is about the problems we have with all of this. And I know that we're meant to be having a solution-oriented conversation here. And Aldo, you know, I'm a big fan of all of the work that you just talked about. But the problem we have in healthcare is that we have inherited from the last century all of our institutions. So we have a bunch of very well-intentioned mid to late 20th century institutions for regulating, for delivering, and for paying for healthcare, none of which have anything to do with all of the really amazing things that we actually would like to have in our clinics and in our societies to shape everything from surgical procedures to public health decision-making. And so this is something I think about a lot. It's something I think about in terms of data. It's something I think about in terms of actually studying laws and public policies. And so what do we do about all of this? I was very glad to hear that my friend Nick Schneider would be on the panel as well. What's great about Nick is that he's a medical doctor, but he actually writes health law in Germany. So he knows about what actually needs to happen in the clinic. You know, you have some willing victims at the hospital in London who are willing to wear headsets and go along with your research projects. But the reality is that the vast majority of doctors who are the ultimate folks who need to be adopting these AI tools for them to be meaningfully used in the clinic are coming from a totally different perspective. Nick has the unique challenge, and I don't think many people envy you this position, of trying to write laws that actually facilitate this. And I think this is particularly important because something that I talk about a lot is not just the business models. I was a business school professor for 10 years at Harvard Business School, so of course we need business model innovation. That's what many people in this room are good at, is coming up with new business models and coming up with new tools. But we also need all of the stuff that facilitates it. So we need the public policies, the laws that actually make these new business models possible. If we keep sitting around and saying we're going to pay for healthcare, whether it's in the German statutory health insurance system or in any other European health insurance system, we're just going to keep paying for things exactly the way we have done for the last 30, 40, 50 years. That is not going to, sure, we'll get some innovation. There's some really good startups out there, some of which I work with, that are somehow able to, you know, do the yoga to twist themselves into a pretzel to find the way to get their product paid for. But the reality is we need innovation in our laws that actually shape how we can do things and meaningfully influence the adoption of new technologies. So with that, I'm gonna hand the ball over to Nick to talk about what's actually going on the policy side. And I'll say that even though I started off on a bit of a negative note, saying we have all these problems in healthcare, I'm cautiously optimistic about our opportunities in European healthcare innovation, especially vis-a-vis AI. So, your turn.
Thank you so much, Ariel. It's always a pleasure talking after you. And thanks for the intro. I think it's crucial for us to actually think from the patient perspective when it comes to how we regulate innovation in healthcare. And when I started at the ministry, one of my first big projects, which I was given, my first dossier, was, well, we have this new law coming from Brussels called the General Data Protection Regulation, and you're going to be the one negotiate from health sites. And I was being an MD at the ministry, not a lawyer, and looking at it and said, wow, there's a lot of potential in this draft document. But the debate within government was mainly about data protection. It was not about providing a nurturing legal environment for data use which protects citizens' rights. And that's what the GDPR is all about. The GDPR is a regulation on protecting the rights of the individual and ensuring the free flow of data. And that's often forgotten. So at that time, we started to discuss at the ministry how we kind of push the envelope in Germany. And during the German presidency in 2020, we suggested having secondary use of health data as one of the key priority areas. Most people thought it was stupid. It was impossible for Germany because we were the laggards. We are not the ones who could be shining in the European level when it comes to secondary use of data. But we could bring people from the US, from the UK, from Scandinavia to Germany to discuss this, how they did it. Finland already had a good model. Denmark had a good model with their registries. Sweden was quite far ahead of us. So we could learn from them and start developing our own laws. And in parallel, and that was something which the COVID pandemic really brought forward, was the debate that we actually all saw that we don't have the tools. We were all dependent on data, many COVID data from Israel, and also from the UK and from Denmark, to build the vaccines. What we did was all based on foreign data. And that was a big push in Europe in general to move towards the so-called European health data space. So what is the European health data space going to be? First of all, data in primary use. So if I'm going to go and visit a doctor, if I'm sick in France, I can have the data travel with me so that if my colleague in France can access my data to treat me. The second part is going to be, I can access my data. I can see what data is being covered from me when I'm treated, and I have the right to do so with electronic health records. That was also foreseen in the GDPR, but now is re-enshrined in health law. The third part is interoperability of health records. Extremely important because now in Germany you have over 100 different payers and players in the market which are not interoperable because they all profit from proprietary use. And the fourth one, that's the one I'm working on, is secondary use of health data, to make sure that data which is there can be accessed through secure processing environments for specific purposes, including AI training, to ensure that we have better products, safer products in the European markets. And I think that's the key thing which we need to address. And everything what Aldo said earlier is actually the vision we have, what we want to see happening on a European level at scale for 500 million citizens by providing equal access to health data in secure processing environments. It's not about selling data, monetizing data. It's about providing anonymized, pseudonymized data in secure processing environments for specific purposes. And one is also product development, because sure, we want to have safer products. And AI trained in the US or in China is not per se applicable to our populations in our healthcare system. So we need to retrain, revalidate those algorithms on our data. And that for me is a patient safety and quality assurance issue. And that's why I'm happy to now give the floor to my colleague Rainer Birkenbach, who's the CEO of BrainLab, and can show us how actually innovation really accesses the markets and what already is being done with data, especially in Germany and on German data. Yes. Hopefully.
Thank you very much. And I maybe would like to pick up what you just said in terms of that at the end, the patients need to basically benefit from all the solutions. So we are providing digital solutions for surgery since over 35 years. So we started digitizing surgery when nobody was talking about digitalization in this field, actually. And to give you an example of what we're doing, for example, in the area of neurosurgery, when there's a complex brain tumor case for a neurosurgeon, our customers, they can use our software solutions to take all the data of this patient into one sophisticated model where we extract all the anatomical information, all the functional information. So we build a personalized digital twin for this patient. And then we take this information into the operating room where we provide a navigation system like Google Maps for the street, but navigation for the operating room where we precisely track all the instruments the surgeon is holding in his hand, or robotic systems in this field to fully execute this plan. So it's very data heavy. And when we started 35 years ago, there was basically no regulation. So even software back then was not even a medical product. So it was very easy to develop products and roll them out. So from today's perspective, I would call that under-regulated. Looking at where we are today, we chatted over coffee on the medical device regulation, which is making the life really hard for the industry. But at the same time, when we're looking, there's a fundamental change that happened over those 20 or 30 years. In the past, it was basically all about better accuracy, better outcome, or maybe lower cost per treatment, or both at the same time. But there's so much technology that was brought into the healthcare system, into the operating rooms, that made every single step maybe better, but as a total solution, it made it more complex. And with better data, better treatment workflows, we have a huge leverage in improving the efficiency. And when you look at the challenge in the healthcare system, specifically in surgery as well, where in Germany, for example, in the next 10 years, about 30% of hospital staff will retire. And at the same time, luckily, we all live longer, but there's more treatment options, there's more complex cases. So just imagine 10, 20 years down the road, less people, more patients, this will be a problem. And I strongly believe that digitalization can really solve this problem by looking at the efficiency of workflows, and using AI can heavily improve that. But at the same time, we are now went from under-regulated to over-regulated. And I think we all together, from research, economy, regulators, we all need to work together to basically start acting now, because we can't start talking 10 years about this topic and at the end have maybe no regulations or complex regulations, because the world around us, outside of Europe, is clearly at a faster pace right now. And I think Europe has a huge opportunity to really set the standard here, but I think we need to catch up and act quickly.
I think it's clear to everyone that ChatGPT became only really strong, so past ChatGPT, once OpenAI started to collect data at the scale of all English text on the whole planet. That's when the smartness starts. So the amount of data that you hold makes a difference. And here's an interesting experience I made this summer at a major conference in the US. I met the CMO of one of the largest healthcare providers in the United States. And he was telling me the story that they have all this data, they have millions of patients. But for example, they can't build a cancer AI, because if you have a very severe cancer, you may not be able to work anymore. If you don't work, you lose your health insurance. And then, aside from the human tragedy, the health insurer or the health hospital system does not know if you survived. It's very difficult to build a cancer AI if you don't know if the patient survived. Just to give you one example. And I think here we have a unique opportunity in Europe with our public, structured, as ever complex healthcare systems that provide healthcare for everyone. So the data for everyone is coming together. We have the opportunity to link this up. And if you really think about the vision, within 2029, 2030, when EHDS is fully there, we'll have 500 million patients. No other trade bloc on this planet can compete with the data. And we have a unique opportunity that we need to harness. So my question is, what's holding us back? What are the players?
I think it's a natural hesitation we see in the healthcare system itself. In Germany, we have, especially in Germany, but other EU member states are similar, but maybe not as fragmented as we are. We have a lot of power in the self-administration, and we have a federal system. So the complexity we see on the European level, we also already see within our country. And maybe that might also be a second mover advantage here as well, because on the European side, we can learn from Germany in a certain way, because Europe has 27 data protection authorities. Germany by itself has 18. 16 per federal state, one federal one. Bavaria has 2 because they're one for the public sector, one for the commercial sector. But we somehow manage. But I think we manage in a way which takes too long. And we have to facilitate the processes that if one entity decides, it's valid for all of them. So we have to trust each other. And I think there's a trust issue in the healthcare system which we have to be working on. Trust from patients to the system, to the data providers, trust between data protection authorities, trust between industry, researchers, and medical practitioners, trust between the ones representing the statutory health insurance system, the insurers, the payers, and the providers. In the end, which data do we have in the system? It's mainly claims data. It's mainly what the doctors, the pharmacists claim from the insurance system. is that data biased? Is it unbiased? This can be collected, but it adds transparency. And some people are afraid of transparency. So there's something where we need a push, and the HDS will give this push. And we do have a clear deadline. Secondary use of health data must be made available until 26 March 2029. The clock is ticking, and we have to work on it right now. And that's why we're bringing all the stakeholders together to actually co-develop an infrastructure which will ensure that data is made accessible. But we will also need a change of mindset. And that's going to be the most difficult part.
So what's the business case in driving us in that direction? All these different players are aligned by economics.
Yeah, so I don't think we want to think about a business case. We want to think about business cases. So there are many. It's not a one-size-fits-all thing. Nick's absolutely right that we have to get out of this mindset, and it goes back to where I started, which is we can't just assume business as usual. We can't just say, well, this is just how we've been doing things and paying for things in healthcare for the last 60 years, so let's just go on doing it and assume that we'll get some AI along the way. What's intriguing about the European health data space as it is being implemented is that there are a combination of real penalties for not complying with requirements, and so my vision of European policy, if and when correctly implemented, and the devil is always in the details, is that we end up with a mix of carrots and sticks. So we end up with a mix of sort of penalties for not playing by the rules and not making your data available for secondary use, whether that be for developing cool new products or for advancing health research or public health. But that we also start to highlight the businesses that are emerging from all of this. And I think we were chatting about this over a coffee earlier. It's not just that we're seeing the glimmers of this already. We're seeing there are real companies that have real amounts of venture capital funding that are emerging in Germany, the ones I know best, and elsewhere, that are building business models around the premise of things that we can do with data once we actually have data. That data sets that are usable, that are AI ready. It's not just sort of here's a dump of a bunch of poorly structured data. Go do your best. So I think we're seeing this, but we have to, and the opportunity we have. The word opportunity is in the title of this panel. The opportunity that we have here is to rethink what business models we actually want, and that's a unique one. I think in the United States, the ship has sailed. Like we've got a bunch of proprietary data sets. We have a bunch of challenges with certain players having outsized market power. There are court cases going on about this. We have, it's sort of the system is what it is. And by the way, a lot of the AI companies these days are optimizing for basically squeezing the most out of hospital billing, which is a lucrative business for hospitals. Doesn't do a heck of a lot for patients. And the opportunity we have in Europe is to say, okay, how can we totally from scratch rebuild infrastructure that is AI ready, that facilitates data sharing where it's appropriate, when it's appropriate, and when it's in the service of improving health for patients, and we can build a bunch of cool companies around this. And so that's where I'm excited. But it's not a business model. It's a bunch of business models. What the pharmaceutical industry needs to do innovation efficiently, more efficiently, is not the same thing as what the radiology industry needs to build better algorithms, and it's certainly not the same thing as what our public health experts need to build better early warning systems for the next pandemic. So I think we should think about this in a much more nuanced way, but again, with a bit of optimism.
Rainer, your company builds surgical supportive technology, but actually you have a lot of AI in there. Yeah. What were the hurdles that you face in getting that forward?
Yeah, maybe quickly to what you said. Yes, there are many business cases, and I strongly believe, to refer to what I initially said, the largest business case is the efficiency gain in the healthcare system. It's hard to basically calculate what that means, but just looking at how many operating rooms in Germany are not operating because there's no personnel, and look at how long it takes to get an appointment at your doctor or for your treatment, 10 years down the road, this will be a disaster. So the main business case is really getting this across. And a good example, maybe, we're also very active in the area of spinal surgery, where we do spinal planning for simple and complex spinal cases. And planning, pre-planning prior to surgery meant manual planning. So how many screws are you placing per pedicle, how long, what diameter, etc. And that took like 20 minutes, 30 minutes if you did it carefully. Of course, nobody planned. Why would you sit down 30 minutes to plan this case? Now with AI in this software, we have trained an AI model with over 20,000 image data sets of real patients, plus gold standard outcomes from prior surgeries, and trained this model. And the product now, which is released in many countries, this gives you the spinal plan like for 2, 4, 6, 8 screws automatically. So you load the data, less than a minute later, you have the full digital plan. And now, of course, why wouldn't you plan? Because it's that easy. And why invest in a medical robot without having a proper plan? But it's the technology that makes this possible. And now, also from the patient perspective, I think that's the main business case. As a patient, would you rather go in surgery with a detailed plan or have the surgeon just start in the operating room and then figure out what the situation is there? I think it's obvious what the choice is. But the difficulty is get the data. You referred to the different data sets we need. Just using data from Asian operating room or Asian patients won't help us here. So it's the sheer amount of data that's required. That's the problem number one. Second problem is that there's a huge it's a bit ironic. There's a huge agreement when you talk to, maybe it's confirmation bias on my side, but when you talk to patients or doctors, everybody agrees on what needs to happen. But at the same time, there's this, specifically in Germany, German angst. There's data privacy laws, and we rather don't do this. So the difficulty is to get the right amount of data in time. I'm not even talking about the cost you need to pay to get the data, but to actually get access in the right numbers. And when we talk about like X-ray images, CT, MRT, that's already difficult. When we talk about other data, like for example, video data out of operating rooms, suddenly you're in Germany, again, I think it's the most complex area, you have a whole other discussion. So there's works councils, because you might see the name tag of people on video, so it's a whole other world of problems suddenly. And it's very cumbersome, very expensive, and not straightforward. And I think that's in Europe, if we get it right, it will be a clear set of rules and it will be straightforward. But I think we saw a lot of cool examples today across many industries on how AI is used. In healthcare, typically you look at examples from like radiology detecting certain tumor types, etc. But there are so many areas where AI is under the hood, basically already doing improvements in products, making this a lot faster. So this need for data will go up exponentially. And with all the problems I explained, for many companies that will be a huge, huge problem. And internationally, competitors will be faster.
Okay, fantastic. So one thing that always strikes me about digital health is not just the opportunity, but also the scale of what it can do. So, you know, pharma is one of the biggest sectors in Europe, and we're great in that. And you know, because we believe in science, you know, science is true even if you don't believe in it. I see a great future there. I think the fascinating thing about digital health is it could achieve the same scale. So for example, this example I showed you, what we did in Wales, effectively it's a technology that can predict that you will have a stroke in the next 3 months. So I can prevent that. Well, how do you call a drug that you take that prevents you getting sick? Imagine you had a vaccine against stroke, a vaccine against heart attack. So you can think about digital health in that space as digital vaccines. So now maybe you get a sense of the scale of the market we could access here by harnessing the data, by harnessing the innovation potential and our belief in science, that we can put ourselves really at the forefront of the rate. I don't think anything in China can compete with that. They have a fractured market. I think the US is on its own route. But I think we have a unique opportunity here to drive at a global scale a digital health business. And there are a few small studies, and I hope that Ariel and Nick can be convinced to do a proper study. If we are to harness all the intellectual property that sits in the European healthcare data, we can give it to, you know, for free to the Europeans and let the rest of the world pay. What % of our annual healthcare bill could we finance with that? And I leave you with that thought and thank Ariel, Nick, and Rainer for a fantastic panel.